JD Vance humiliated George Stephanopoulos so badly that ABC News cut off his microphone and went straight to commercial break. Now, there's so much news that they could have talked about because it is a crazy news cycle right now. From the historic peace deal in the Middle East to the government shutdown to supply chains and tariffs, even more on China. They could have talked about all of this, but instead, George Stephanopoulos decided to go down this random rabbit hole about bribery, unproven bribery accusations against Tom Homan. An accusation, by the way, that began because of a sting operation under Joe Biden. So this news is well over a year old. And, JD Vance called him out on it. Hey, there's actual news going on. Why are you talking about this? And, well, I think George Stephanopoulos' face and ABC News' reaction says it all.
I don't know what tape you're referring to, George. I saw media reports that Tom Homan accepted a bribe. There's no evidence of that. And here's, George, why fewer and fewer people watch your program and why you're losing credibility. Because you're talking for now 5 minutes with the Vice President of the United States about this story regarding Tom Homan, a story that I've read about, but I don't even know the video that you're talking about. Meanwhile, low-income women can't get food because the Democrats and Chuck Schumer have shut down the government. Right now, we're trying to figure out how to pay our troops because Chuck Schumer has shut down the government. You are focused on a bogus story. You're insinuating criminal wrongdoing against a guy who has done nothing wrong instead of focusing on the fact that our country is struggling because our government's shut down. Let's talk about the real issues, George. I think the American people would benefit much more from that than from you going down some weird left-wing rabbit hole where the facts clearly show that Tom Homan didn't engage in any criminal wrongdoing.
It's not a weird left-wing rabbit hole. I didn't insinuate anything. I asked you whether Tom Homan accepted $50,000, as was heard on an audio tape recorded by the FBI in September 2024, and you did not answer the question. Thank you for your time this morning.
No, George, I said that I don't.
Up next, we'll be right back.
Now, you heard them cut him off right there, but he actually lied. George Stephanopoulos lied. He said, you didn't answer the question. Go back to that clip again. JD Vance says, no, I haven't heard of this videotape. I actually don't know what you're talking about in regards to this tape you're claiming exists. So not only did JD Vance directly answer the question that Stephanopoulos asked, but he tried to redirect the conversation towards topics that actually matter to the American people. Now, before we move on to the rest of the interview, I just want to point out that this so-called bribery tape, if it really does exist, it's surprising to me. I mean, this is a topic that could, be spent in a whole other video. But if it really is real, you would think it would have leaked out there, right? Joe Biden's administration was out to get President Trump. Why did no one leak that tape then? And then, even though President Trump's second administration is a lot tighter of a ship compared to his first one, there have still been leaks and still people in the administration trying to undermine him and, just put out stories out there. So it's really interesting to me that supposedly there's a tape showing bribery from Tom Homan, yet no one seems to have the evidence for it. Well, JD Vance mentioned that low-income women are struggling right now because of the government shutdown, but it's not just them. It's also our men and women in the military. I mean, these are people who volunteer to serve and protect the country, and they're having to line up at food banks because of the Schumer shutdown. This really is a disgrace.
As I take a step aside here, there is quite a bit of military members and their families in line because of this government shutdown. We're in day 9 of it, and they're here for a food pantry. There's all sorts of food that is available, and I spoke with some military member spouses, and I spoke with some department heads here at the ASYMCA on why this is so important. What's the difference in the amount of people that you've seen from today to previously?
So when we first started coming, there definitely wasn't this amount of people. It was a lot, but it wasn't this amount to where it wrapped around the building. But lately it has been a lot. Like, we were here last week and we were in line for like 2 hours.
In a normal week, we usually run out of food about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Last week we ran out of food about 10:30.
It really is a disgrace that that's happening all around the country. Well, in the interview, George Stephanopoulos also accused the Trump administration of persecuting its political enemies. He specifically talked about Letitia James and this new indictment against her. But the way indictments work, right? First of all, that's not a charge. An indictment is a decision that a grand jury makes as to whether or not there's enough evidence for a case to be brought. By the way, a grand jury is a jury of citizens, people like you and I. So these aren't government government officials, and this grand jury was in one of the most liberal places in the country. So most of those people, even though they're supposed to be unbiased and not political, the reality is that most of them likely voted for Democrats and support Democrats, and yet they overwhelmingly voted to indict Letitia James. So it's not as if this is a case being tried only by people in the Trump administration and only by Trump loyalists, and JD Vance called that out to Stephanopoulos.
Letitia James was indicted in a left-leaning part of our country, a part that voted very heavily against Donald J. Trump for the crime of mortgage fraud. When I read the indictment, when I read the facts in the case, I see a person who committed mortgage fraud. Now, of course, the jury is going to decide whether she ultimately committed a crime. We don't try her. The administration doesn't try her. A judge tries the case, and a jury decides whether she's ultimately guilty. That is what is going to determine whether she goes to prison. I think we let the facts drive this. And George, that's what we've tried to do in the administration's Department of Justice. We've asked ourselves, has a person violated the law? And if that person has violated the law, then we decide to prosecute him. That's what the Department of Justice should do. It didn't do that under Joe Biden's administration. It does under Donald Trump's.
And the irony, of course, is that there are many Letitia James quotes in regards to mortgage fraud, and those quotes are coming back to haunt her. I mean, her own words are being used against her. She's being held to her own standard. So JD Vance, he wasn't just on ABC News and George Stephanopoulos. He really did the rounds this morning. He was on NBC's Meet the Press, and they also went down this Letitia James and political persecution rabbit hole. And JD Vance actually made a great point. He said, hey, if the administration is vindictive, if this is all just revenge and retribution, where are the charges against Joe Biden? Where are the charges against Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton? No, instead they're going after people where they actually have evidence and are able to prove a case of criminal wrongdoing.
We're driven by the law and the facts of the case. I think if you look at the case, the fact that a far-left grand jury in a far-left area indicted Letitia James and James Comey, if you look at the fact that James Comey obviously lied under oath, Letitia James obviously committed mortgage fraud, what we're doing is letting the law drive the prosecution decisions in the Department of Justice. You know who we haven't prosecuted? Joe Biden or Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton.
Okay,
unlike Biden's Department of Justice, Kristen, which actually went after Donald Trump in the midst of an election, we are not doing that. We are letting the law drive these decisions. That's exactly as it should be.
Yeah. Everyone is held equal under the law. And, it's not what happened to President Trump, right? If you take a look at what happened in New York with E. Jean Carroll, what did they do in New York? They actually rewrote the law. They rewrote the statute of limitations because the statute of limitations had already expired. In other words, the Democrats, they did everything they could to go after President Trump, including, rewriting the law. So I don't think this narrative of political persecution and revenge is going to stick, especially when we've just lived through actual political persecution for the last 4 years. Well, going back to ABC News and George Stephanopoulos, they started talking about the ICE raids and the National Guard deployments across the country, and they specifically talked about Chicago and Governor J.B. Pritzker. And woo, JD Vance really went on a rant here.
Governor Pritzker will talk a lot, I'm sure, about how bad Donald Trump is, about how bad I am, and about how bad the administration is. He is the governor of a state that where its biggest city has murder rates that rival the most violent places in the third world, George. Why is he so mad at Donald Trump for trying to keep Chicagoans safe? He should be mad at the criminals that he has failed to keep at bay. We're trying to help him, and we're trying to help the residents of his biggest city. I wish that he would let us, because he certainly isn't doing the job himself.
I'm actually considering making a follow-up video to this because Don Lemon was out there. He does these on-the-street interviews now, and he was out in Chicago, and he was saying, hey, President Trump calls Chicago a hellhole. Is that true? And he's talking to people of all backgrounds. This includes, black women, low-income women, Hispanic, Mexican women, white men, blah, blah. Like, he goes through people from all sorts of different backgrounds. And again and again and again, they tell him, yeah, Chicago's a hellhole. We don't feel safe here. And, you can tell each time he's shocked. He goes someone who, just based on physical appearance, based on their ethnicity and skin color, he thinks, you can tell based on his facial expression, he thinks they're going to agree with him. And then when they say, nope, President Trump is right, we support what he's doing, he's shocked. He has no idea how to respond. So that may be a follow-up video. So I thought that was a great clip there. Well, speaking of Governor J.B. Pritzker, he accidentally made an admission. So this clip has been sort of been going viral on X, but people seem to be missing the news that JB Pritzker actually released here. And the news is that the DOJ is quietly behind the scenes investigating the 2020 election.
Another thing that's happened, and very few people paying attention, you probably are, which is they demanded, the DOJ did, our voter data. Not just ours in Illinois, every state's voter data. Why? They won't tell us why. And actually, what they seem to be looking for, remember back to the 2020 elections, is they want to be able to find voter fraud, which lots of organizations have been looking for voter fraud, as you know, for a long time. There's very little voter fraud going on, very little. They're calling for all these databases so that they can look through them, and yet they won't tell you when they're going to come up with any conclusion about whatever it is they're looking for. Next year, when we have a November election, I think you're going to...
I'm going to stop then because he just starts fear-mongering. First of all, you can't put a timeline on an investigation. You can't put a timeline on justice and, you don't know when you're going to find the evidence that you need. It can take a long time to go through the evidence. So that claim right there is just ridiculous, first of all. Second of all, he starts going down this rabbit hole of, they only want the voter rolls so he can send out the National Guard and the military to vote. He basically starts fear-mongering and claiming, this is proof President Trump is a dictator and he's an authoritarian because he wants to make sure our elections are free and fair. JB Pritzker, why don't you cooperate? Even if you don't, look, I get some people might not want the DOJ having access to voter rolls, but if you wanted to actually cooperate, you could offer a compromise. You could offer an alternative solution. Hey, have some of your representatives come here and we'll work together as state and federal government to figure all of this out. We'll prove it. There are so many other avenues, so many other tactics you could say rather than just resist, which is what the Democrat Party seems to be doing right now. Well, one final interview clip of JD Vance. Like I said, he went on all the news rounds this morning. Of course, the most interesting one was George Stephanopoulos on ABC, but he went on NBC. He also went on Fox News and spoke with Maria Bartiromo. And I thought that was a great interview, especially with the historic peace deal in the Middle East. But before we get to that, I would like to acknowledge the members of today's Governors Club: Ann A., Jenny Rinkin, Beehive 65, Lavon, and Bama Riddenauer. These are people who give tips and super thanks to the channel. I'm so thankful that you're here, and I'm glad that you enjoy the videos. Well, tomorrow, hopefully, we should be getting back all the hostages, and not just the people who are still alive, but even the bodies of the deceased, so they can be put to rest and given a respectful funeral and burial, and so their family members can get, at least some sort of closure. Not just our hostages, but also Israel's, of course. And they started talking about that. Like I said, George Stephanopoulos could have talked about so much actual news, but instead he decided to go down that rabbit hole. Well, I'm glad that on Fox with Maria, at least JD Vance could talk about actual issues.
It's hard to say, Maria, because obviously this is a war zone. They have to locate the hostages. They have to gather them up. They have to take them to a safe place and then transport them. So it's a little bit unpredictable, but we've been told to expect them by tomorrow, Israel time, which of course would be early morning here in the United States. We'll see what happens, but the president is extremely confident these hostages are going to come home. He's actually flying to the Middle East later today so that he can welcome them in person. And Maria, one thing I have to say about the president's leadership style, about his diplomatic style, which of course has been criticized by much of the corporate media for a very long time, is it actually got results. And I think the story of how this historic peace deal came to fruition is that you had Secretary Rubio, you had Jared Kushner, you had Steve Witkoff, who were empowered by the President of the United States in very non-conventional ways to bring the Gulf Arab states and Israel to the table and really force them together to hammer out a peace deal. I take a special pride in Steve Witkoff, who was attacked mercilessly by the press. He wasn't experienced. He wasn't a well-heeled diplomatic negotiator. Well, the fact that he brought a fresh set of eyes to this and the fact that he brought such great energy to it, I think is one of the reasons why we are at this moment where we can say we're on the cusp of a lasting peace. And the fact that President Trump didn't go down the failed pathway that every president of both parties had pursued is, again, why we are on the cusp of getting these hostages home. So it's an amazing thing, but I think that it shows the power of President Trump's non-conventional leadership style, and that's why we're here. I think the whole country we should just be proud. We should be proud of this negotiating team. We should be proud of our country, because these hostages are going to live their lives thanks to what the United States of America did.
Speaking of unconventional, you know, in 2016, they mocked President Trump, right? They said he was going to cause World War III, yet he's been able to broker peace, you know, so many times, almost a dozen in less than 10 months. So it really is incredible. And a lot of people criticize the tariffs. They criticize the National Guard. They criticize the ICE raids. But when you take a look at all of those situations, they're just examples of President Trump being unpredictable and President Trump following through on his threats. The same thing, you know, with what's happening here with the shutdown. So that actually gives him leverage, right, to enemies whenever you're trying to broker a peace deal and trying to come to a negotiation. And you know, the people who are at the table, they're going to see, oh, President Trump is unpredictable. Oh, he's actually going to follow through, unlike Barack Obama, who, you know, drew a red line. And once that red line was crossed, oh, nothing happened. Unlike with President Trump, if you get even close to the red line, he goes off the rails and, again, is unpredictable. So speaking of that unconventional style, I think it actually works to everyone's advantage. As always, though, all of that is just my analysis and commentary. That's what's happening in the world of politics from my point of view, and I would love to hear from you. So obviously, I had an issue with that interview from George Stephanopoulos to JD Vance. My question is, if you had the opportunity to interview JD Vance, what would you ask? What would the stories be that you're interested about? Like, would it be, you know, about the news stories of the day? Would you want to do more of a personal interview? Would you let me know maybe what your first question would be. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you haven't already, please be sure to leave me a thumbs up. I know it's a simple thing to ask for, but it really does help me reach more viewers like you in the algorithm. Be sure to smash that subscribe button and to check out one of these videos.